Today is the 23rd anniversary of my bat mitzvah to the day. This was not planned, it was just a very serendipitous coincidence, and it's actually my mother, when she was bat mitzvah, the same Torah portion that she had. So I think just a really lovely, confluence of things that are going on right now. And of course, congratulations, Abby, on your bat mitzvah. So as Rabbi Krinsky said, my name is Liz Kleinrock. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a transracially adopted Korean, Asian American, Jewish, queer woman. I'm an educator, specifically focused on DEI, stands for diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-bias, and anti-racism, and I do this work with young people, adults, schools, companies, both within and outside of the Jewish community. So to start you off today, I'm going to take you back to 2003. West Wing was still on TV, just like painting a picture. Facebook wouldn't actually exist for another year. Beyonce and Jay-Z weren't even married yet. And at this time, I was on my way to Brooklyn as part of our synagogue's confirmation class trip. And before you get upset about what I'm going to share, I just want to tell you it was a different synagogue. This is not reflective of Addis. So upon arrival in New York, we were met by our teacher and guide for the weekend, who happened to be a rabbi in the Hasidic community. By age 14, I was used to being questioned about my presence in Jewish spaces because, shockingly, when most people, including Jews, picture a Jewish person, they don't picture somebody who looks like me. However, no amount of bracing myself could prepare me for what happened next. The rabbi took one look at me in the crowd and announced to my entire class, "You are not a real Jew, and you never will be." I'm really proud to say, though, that in that moment, my friends did not stay silent. I think our desire to speak up against injustice is one of our best qualities. But no matter how much they protested, this rabbi was not to be swayed. And I remember shutting down. The entire bus ride back from New York, I don't think I said a word to anybody. And it would honestly even be years before I would tell the story to my own parents. I promise that this is also not meant to be a dig at the Hasidic community, especially that they bear the brunt of most physical anti-Semitic attacks in our country. I share this really to demonstrate that even the most intellectual Jewish leaders can still have awareness gaps. And I happen, this month, to love May. It's the best month of the year, in my opinion, because we get to celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage, as well as Jewish American culture and history. It honestly feels like this month was made for me. And the only moments where I struggle are when I'm forced to choose between these identities. In my work as an anti-bias and anti-racist practitioner, I often speak about the importance of rejecting binary thinking, of embracing the yes and over the either or mentality. I am not either Asian or Jewish. I am not 50% Jewish and 50% Asian because I am not a pie chart. I am wholly, fully, unapologetically Asian, and I am wholly, fully, unapologetically Jewish. If only this rabbi had known that. In the same theme, I believe in the importance of creating balance in the way that we discuss our identities and our history. In May, I don't want to talk about the Holocaust. I don't want to talk about anti-Semitism or anti-Asian racism or xenophobia, because I don't believe that any group should ever be defined by the worst things that have been done to them by other people. I want to be able to uplift and center the most beautiful parts of my identity and my heritage. And truthfully, I was torn of whether or not to share this story with you, not wanting to come off as too negative. It's fascinating how you gaslight yourself often in this process. And at the same time, it is experiences like this that have motivated me to focus on the intersectionality of the AAPI and Jewish communities. Growing up, my peers and I learned some Jewish history in a vacuum at Hebrew school once and then twice a week. And in regular school, we learned about the Holocaust in a fairly similarly disconnected way. We were given little context of the history of the Jewish diaspora, let alone the broad and beautiful diversity of Jews around the world. From my limited perspective growing up, Jewish history and identity were solely tied to Ashkenazi communities that had migrated through parts of Europe. But as I grew and developed greater self-awareness, I began searching for my people within the Jewish community. I read articles and books and social media posts about different AAPI Jews. We seemed to appear at first like freckles, just popping up here and there, always among a sea of pale faces. But there had to be something else that I was missing. After that experience in Brooklyn, I felt jaded and disconnected from being Jewish. It took me years to find my way back to Judaism, on my own terms. And even now, 20 years later, I still think about that rabbi and the knowledge I wish I had had to speak up for myself in that moment. Because what I discovered doing my own research was the validation of belonging that I had always hoped for. For centuries, not only have there been Jews in Asia, but there has also been a history of Asian and Jewish solidarity. Imagine my surprise when I first learned about the Jews of Kaifeng, China. Jews from India and Persia first arrived in China during the Song dynasty and grew to a community of approximately 5,000. Kaifeng Jews built their first synagogue in 1163 and worshipped in both Hebrew and Mandarin, praying in the direction of Jerusalem. I also learned about the Tamil Tatar Jews of Sri Lanka, who have been around since the 9th century, as well as Pakistani Jews and the Bukharan Jews of Central Asia. I loved reading about the Jews of Cochin, the oldest Jewish community in India, as well as the Paradesi Jews and the Jews of Goa. The presence of Jews in India can actually be traced back to the time of King Solomon. One of my favorite facts, though, that I learned was that to this day, the largest Seder in the world is held in the Himalayan mountains of Nepal. Seriously, if you go Google Seder on top of the world, you can learn all about it. It's really quite amazing. And did you know that there was a Tahitian Jewish princess? Alexander Salmon, the first Jew to reside in Tahiti, married into the Tahitian royal family when he married Princess Adiaho, a Polynesian princess and leader of the Teva tribe. However, at that time, Tahitian law made it illegal for any Polynesian to marry a foreigner, but for 3 days, Queen Pomare IV suspended this law by royal order for them to marry. Their daughter was Queen Maro, the last queen of Tahiti. What amazed me most about these Asian Jewish places is that they experienced relatively little anti-Semitism compared to their European counterparts. For example, Thailand, being a Buddhist nation, one of the more religiously tolerant compared to other nations, became home to the first Thai synagogue in the 1600s. Now, I'm a history nerd teacher, so thank you for bearing with me as I geek out on these fun facts. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have a lengthy history also of solidarity movements. Who we are as Asians and Pacific Islanders, as Jews, has often been defined for us by other people. And our communities have similarly faced displacement in our own homes due to the ethnic cleansing and Western and Arab colonization. Our histories, struggles, and goals are far more intertwined than we believe. During the Holocaust, approximately 20,000 Jews found refuge in Shanghai and another 1,300 in Manila. A small number of Jews also were granted safe haven in Thailand. But out of everything I read, nothing stirred me as much as the story of Japanese Imperial Consul Chiune Sugihara, the first Japanese diplomat posted to Lithuania who saved the lives of thousands of Jews during the Shoah. At the dawn of the war, Sugihara saw thousands of Jewish people struggling to flee for safety. In defying orders from the Japanese government, he granted around 2,000 visas for Jewish refugees. He was paid for his allyship by losing his ministry job. And in 1984, Yad Vashem awarded him the title of Righteous Among the Nations. So to speed us up to the present day, at the height of COVID-related anti-Asian racism, it was not lost on me that some of the first organizations to speak out in solidarity after Atlanta, Monterey Park, and Half Moon Bay were from the Jewish community. Now, I also don't wish to only paint a picture through rose-colored lenses. Being a Jewish person of color often means playing both offense and defense. It means fighting to be seen as Jewish enough from both within and outside of the Jewish community. And truthfully, I hope that the things that I share today for the young Jews of color who are listening right now, I hope that none of this makes sense to you. I hope that you listen to this and say, wow, this has not been my experience, truthfully. I hope that you don't relate to any of this. Because I remember speaking with my friend Chen-Julie Wong, who is the author of the incredible book Beautiful Country and a fellow Asian Jew, because after her High Holy Day sermon, where she called out the racism that she had experienced at her synagogue, after she spoke, she was appalled at the response from some of her fellow congregants. "How dare you?" some of them said. "You were granted this incredible privilege of speaking on the Bima on the High Holy Days, and you use this platform to call out our racism?" She and I talked about how many of us claim to value accountability in our community, in theory often, but not actually in practice, because it's a lot easier to critique others than rather hold up the mirror to yourself. However, one of the most crucial lessons I have learned in my line of work is that accountability is truly a radical act of love. When people call you in, it means that they care enough about you and your relationship to put in that effort to sustain it. And truly, if Jews of color did not love being Jewish, did not love being part of this community, we would just leave. We wouldn't put in the energy. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to address that elephant in the room that far too many Jewish people of color face racism in Jewish spaces. Approximately 15% of Jews in the US identify as Jews of color. It's approximately 1 in 7. And in 2021, the organization Jews of Color conducted an extensive survey with Stanford University. 80% of us reported experiencing discrimination in Jewish settings. For me personally, it was a Jewish peer who first called me an anti-Asian racial slur at Jewish summer camp. It was a Jewish crush who first told me that his mother would never let him marry someone who looked like me. And while I understand the constant pressure to focus on educating folks outside of the Jewish spaces about anti-Semitism, we cannot forget that we have an internal responsibility as well. Being a historically marginalized group does not give us a pass. It does not mean we're incapable of harming other people. And at the same time, as a Jewish person of color who works in DEI, I have unfortunately seen Jewish people left out of this conversation time and time again. Far too often, we are met with hostility from practitioners who are far more concerned with what race are Jews than starting with the question, who are the Jewish people? And it's such a pity because when you're trained to only see in black and white, there is so much in between that you end up missing. Being a Jewish woman of color, one of the strangest experiences has honestly been recognizing that my appearance sometimes grants me a strange, sort of a very uncomfortable privilege, because people in DEI and anti-racism and social justice spaces are often more willing to listen to me talk about Judaism and anti-Semitism, because in their understanding, whiteness equals bad, and because I don't present as white, that must be good. However, we know all too well that in the myth of white supremacy, it doesn't matter your race, gender, or where you stand on politics or social issues, because to them, truly, a Jew is a Jew. 1 week ago today, a shooter in Allen, Texas, claimed the lives of 8 people at a shopping mall, including 3 people of Korean American descent, Kyo-sung Cho, Cindy Cho, and James Cho, 1 person of Indian descent, Aishwarya Taritkanda, 2 Latina children, Sofia and Daniela Mendoza, Elio Cumana Rivas, and Christian LaCour. It's no surprise that the gunman had a history of anti-Semitism, racism, and intentionally targeted an Asian and Latino community. I do not intend to end this talk on such a sad note, but rather to remind us that our common goal transcends racial and ethnic lines. As activist Lila Watson reminds us, our liberation is bound together. For far too long, I tried to reconcile my Jewish and Asian identities into a history and narrative that didn't seem to have space for both. It felt like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And sometimes I think about if I met that rabbi in Brooklyn again today, I would tell him that my Asianness and my Jewishness are intertwined. I cannot separate these parts of who I am from one another, and nor would I ever wish to, because I belong and we belong. We always have, and we always will. Thank you.